Now let's look at controlling tracks during playback. Most of the following regarding track control is also true for buses. We'll look at a couple of tracks, one audio and one MIDI, and see what controls are available and how we use them to control what we hear during playback. To make this easier, I'm going to hide some of the tracks. Tracks and buses can be hidden from view in a couple of ways. They can be done individually by right-clicking on the track header and selecting Hide Track, or they can also be multiple selected. Another option is to use the Tracks View menu, again where Hide Tracks is possible. But there's also the Track Manager. This can also be accessed by pressing H. Once open, we can use the buttons down the right-hand side for quick selection. Notice these are toggles that need to be clicked again to turn the selection off. For now, I'm going to hide all of the tracks except the bass guitar and the MIDI keyboard. If we wish to keep visible tracks in the console view and track view in sync, we need to check the Keep Track Console Visibility States in Sync option. If you want different tracks visible in the track and console views, you'll need to make sure that this box is unchecked and then access the console views track manager from there and set the visible tracks option accordingly in the same way as we have here. We'll click on OK. Hiding tracks and buses will come in particularly useful when we explore screen sets later. Now let's take a look at the bass track. It's already resized so that we can see all of the controls. Most of these are duplicated in the console view and inspector. We'll look at the console view in more detail in the mixing section. At the top we have the MSR widgets. Clicking on M will mute the track, and when we play back we won't be able to hear it. Unchecking the M will allow us to hear it. The S will solo the track, and now when we play back it should be the only one we can hear. If you can hear more than one track, you probably have the dim solo mode active. This can be turned on and off in the mix module. Remember, we may need to show that because it may be off screen. Dim solo allows non-solo tracks to be heard at reduced volume. This can be useful to hear the tracks in context. If I turn that on and press play again, you'll notice the rest of the tracks are still there, but lower in volume. We saw how to set the level of dim solo tracks in the setup section. Another solo mode is exclusive solo. This mode only allows one solo track and bus at a time. Selecting solo on one track will now cancel solo on any others that are currently soloed. For example, if I solo the bass track, then solo the MIDI keyboard, the bass track's solo status is cancelled. There are a few exceptions to this. Soloing a folder in exclusive solo mode, or soloing a synth that has several tracks assigned to it, or soloing a track or a bus that has its solo button assigned to a group, will not be affected. There is a third solo option, and that's solo override. It's set by shift-clicking a track or bus's solo button. When active, the bus will show two arrowheads either side of the S in the solo button. This bus will now be heard regardless of any other track's solo or mute status. Note that this is not indicated in the mix module. Shift-click again to turn it off. Mute always overrides solo, so if you have a track soloed and muted, you won't hear it. The record button arms the track for recording, and the input echo allows us to hear any effects on the track while recording. We'll cover those in more detail in that section. To the right is the numeric peak indicator, and this will show the highest peak that has been reached so far. There are also track and bus peak markers. These are markers that are generated in real time. They'll appear behind the current now time as the fresh highest peak is reached. By default, anything lower than 0 dB will be green, 0 dB above will appear red. Both of these indicators can be turned on or off in the meter options found in the TV options menu. Reset all markers can be selected here, and individual tracks can also have their markers reset by double-clicking on the track meters. This menu contains options for whether meters are displayed or not depending on the function type, whether they display horizontally or vertical, and also meter level display types such as peak or RMS or both. We can also set the scale here and with a label show with the meters or not. We can also choose to hold peaks, and if peaks are held, we can also lock them. This is handy when it comes to recording, and we'll look at that in that section. Options for pre or post fader can be set on playback meters. We can also set the bus meters as pre or post fader or pre-fader and post effects. Underneath the track name is the edit filter, and this selects the type of data that we can view and edit in the clip pane. We'll look at the individual choices in the relative sections. Next come the track state widgets. The R is the read automation switch. Turning this off causes the track to ignore any automation present. The W is the write automation toggle. We'll look at both of these in more detail in the automation section. The freeze track icon allows us to freeze a track. When a track is frozen, the track's bounced down temporarily, including all effects, and disables the effects bin. It's there to save CPU power if needed. Again, we'll look at this in more detail in the mixing section. The A is the archive button. When the track is archived, it is muted and uses no resources. Tracks cannot be archived or unarchived while playback is in progress. Beneath those are the track volume slider. The volume level can be increased by moving the slider to the right or reduced by moving it to the left. The figure to the right shows the current level setting as a decibel below unity figure. The icon just to the left of that indicates that there is a volume envelope present on the track. Next is the pan control, which controls where the track sits in the stereo field, left, right or centre. And the gain control is a pre-fader volume trim, useful for adjusting faders for grouping or calibrating them to match the decibel reference. Double-clicking on any of these three controls will reset them to the default snap to positions. These snap to positions can be changed by setting the level you want to set as a snap to, and then right-clicking and selecting snap to equals current from the value submenu. Pressing F2 over all of these controls allows precise text entry edit. Next come the input and output drop-downs, where you can change the devices that the audio is recorded from or sent to. All of your audio devices should be visible here, displayed by friendly name if you have that option checked in Preferences. If you don't see a device here, you'll need to go to Preferences Audio Devices and make sure that it's checked there. But that's subject to limitations of ASIO that I mentioned in the audio device setup video. Inputs and outputs in Sonar are seen as stereo pairs. So for example, my output shows as left Z12, right Z12 and stereo Z12. If I want channel 1, I select the left option, channel 2 the right, and if I want stereo, the stereo option, which is channel 1 and 2 on my Z panned fully left and right respectively. If there are any sends present on the track, they will also show here. We'll take a closer look at those in the routing video and use them when we get to mixing. At the bottom left are the take and automation lane buttons. Take lanes are the new way of showing multiple takes on a track. Clicking on the take button will expand any existing takes into their own individual lanes. These lanes are indented slightly to show their association to the track. They have their own mute, solo and record buttons. There's also an area for entering text to keep notes about the take. We can double click in that to start text entry. They have their own edit filter, but there's no track automation option here. The options are clips, audio transients and clip automation. There are buttons to insert a new layer and one to delete the layer. Note that this deletes the data and the layer. It is not a hide button. Selecting the lane is achieved by clicking the area above the buttons. They are resizable, but not individually. Click dragging on them to resize them, resizes them all. They can also be renamed in the same way that a track is by double-clicking in the name field. They can also be dragged to rearrange their order. To do that, we left-click where the icon turns into a double-headed arrow and click drag to the new position. Clicking on the icon again hides the lanes. Automation lanes are an alternative additional method of displaying and editing automation data and also new to X2. They appear similar to take lanes and are also indented from the parent track, but only contain an envelope and also have fewer controls. They again can be added to by using the plus sign and hidden by using the minus sign. Note that this is a hide feature, not a delete. They can be click dragged and rearranged into new positions. The envelope can be changed via the edit filter. Clicking on the button again hides them. Shift clicking on this button breaks all the automation out into lanes. We'll look at both these lanes in more detail later. At the left edge of the track header, you'll see the coloured WAI strip. This will only be there if you have any controllers present and you chose to display this option. We looked at that in the control surface setup video. It lets us know which tracks our control surface is currently controlling and can be click dragged to move focus of the control surface. Towards the right is the effects bin, where any track effects are listed and accessed. We can add effects by either right-clicking the effects bin and selecting the effects from the context menu, or click dragging it from the browser as we saw earlier. Finally, we have the track meter. As we've already seen, options for these are set in the track view options menu. The meter type will automatically switch from record level meter to playback meter, depending on the recording state. We looked at the inspector in the tour earlier, but let's look in more detail at those controls that don't appear in a track header. Remember access to the inspectors by pressing I. Just beneath the gain control, we have the Pro channel. Presets can be accessed from here by clicking on the Load Preset icon, or they can be saved by clicking on the Save icon. We can set whether the Pro channel is post or pre-effects bin, and we also have access to the global on-off button. Beneath that is the EQ plot, and if the PC EQ is in use, we'll see the display here. We'll be looking at the Pro channel in more detail when we get to mixing. Beneath the effects bin and the sends area, we have the MSR cluster. Here we find a couple more track control buttons. The interleave button decides whether the track's audio enters the effects present as a stereo or mono signal, regardless of the nature of the track. The phase button will invert the phase of a track if you need to do that. We'll look at these controls in more detail when we get to the console view, as they're identical to that. We'll take a brief look at the MIDI controls, but as many of the buttons are the same as an audio track, I'll only point out where differences occur. Input echo is similar to the audio function, but on a MIDI track, it controls whether any incoming MIDI data is echoed by the track. Effectively, this means played by whatever synth is assigned to the track. There's a velocity trim instead of a gain control, and this adjusts velocity trim for all notes on the track. Input controls where MIDI data is input from. Omni will accept all data from all sources, but an individual port can be chosen, and even an individual channel from an individual port. Output is a synth to which data is sent. This can be a soft synth inserted within Sonar, a rewire device, or an external hardware synth, or a drum map. Channel is a MIDI-only control and controls the channel number that any data is sent on. Bank selects the bank from which patches are selected. The choices you see here will depend on the synth that the track is assigned to. And a patch is a list of individual patches or instrument sounds to choose from. Again, this will be synth dependent. The effects bin is very similar, but only MIDI effects can be loaded. And we'll look at the extra inspector controls for MIDI tracks in a MIDI Basics video when I'll cover MIDI in a bit more depth.